This video isn't intended to offend anyone, but is simply a report of facts and comparisons. The fact of the matter is, making an accurate report of the Vishnu-type parallel is a way of honoring Vishnu himself. In my opinion, Vishnu would prefer the truth be told about him, and restoring his European mythos in a faithful manner is restoring a luster to his crown, regardless of how it makes any individual person feel. And I'd just like to take a moment to say, all of this is building on the research on the Gaelic war god Nate and fire god Manannán that can be found in my book, Taliesin's Map, the Comparative Guide to Celtic Mythology, which is available on Amazon. See the description for the link. For the featured art in this video, I partnered with the artist Arnaud Carrasco, who has created a Cú Chulainn with special emphasis on the key symbols of his mythos. You can check out his other work via the link on screen. I always say that Cú Chulainn is by far the most fully preserved Vishnu type outside of India, and I do not say this at all lightly. The parallel is truly incredible. Point by point, Cú Chulainn has remnants of almost all of the main Vishnu forms or avatars, but all concentrated within himself, all represented as the traits of one divine hero. If it was only 2 or 3 of these shared traits, it might be said to be coincidental, like if Cú Chulainn was only dark and short and protected cows. But when we have some 15 or so different characteristics, all precisely matching the avatars and names of Vishnu, all in one Gaelic figure, it becomes nearly impossible to deny with honesty that this is the Gaelic Vishnu. I truly believe that by the end of the video, the majority of skeptics will agree with my claim. First, we must gain a contextual understanding of the earliest Vedic depictions of Vishnu, so we can approach an image of a European Vishnu. So what was the god Vishnu like in the Vedas, and what was his type like in Proto-Indo-European times? We have to peel back the layers here and try to see what Proto-Indo-European Vishnu would have been like. Vishnu in the earliest sources, such as the Rig Veda, is a sometimes frightening war deity. He has other qualities, but his violent aspect is more foregrounded than might be expected if we looked only at modern Hinduism. Recognized avatars of Vishnu are also frequently known as conquering warriors or otherwise connected to raw violence, such as the heroic warrior king Vasudeva, depicted with a battle mace, Krishna, who urges Arjuna, Indra's incarnation, to war, giving him the spirit to fight, just as Vishnu himself does for Indra in the Vedas, and Narasimha, the fierce part lion avatar of Vishnu, who violently destroys evil. Numerous other examples can be called to mind. Scholar Roger Woodard's book Indo-European Sacred Space describes how Vishnu is one of the most important Vedic war gods, and furthermore, that being a warrior and aiding other war deities with his shining radiant spirit, or tejas, are 2 of his most central functions. Quote, "The banner that Vishnu provided was created from his own radiant energy, tejas, shining like the sun. With this banner, Indra defeated the enemy." Unquote. From Woodard, page 76. See also Mahabharata 5.16 and Varaha BS 43.5-6. Woodard continues, quote, "The yupa, or sacrificial post, belongs to Vishnu, affiliated with the warrior element of divine society, and is also associated with Indra. The Maruts are a band of warrior deities, sons of Rudra, who are especially closely linked to Indra as comrades in arms, but are at times also associated with Vishnu." Unquote. From Woodard, page 95. Vishnu is even hymned as Evaya Marut, the exemplar or lead Marut, in Rig Veda 5.87, which in itself says all that needs to be said on this point. He is the very embodiment of the war band warrior under this title. Woodard goes on to say, quote, Indra is at times drawn into Vishnu's conquering advance, creating space for humankind. In the Soma ceremony hymn of Rigveda 6.69, Indra and Vishnu are invoked to come to the Soma feast on their enemy-conquering horses, stanza 4, unquote, from Woodard, page 260. As Woodard sums it up, quote, Vishnu is the God who conquers and creates space, unquote, from Woodard, page 260. With this important context, we can more accurately assess the Vishnu parallel in European myth. If this context is ignored, the European Vishnu parallel will likely be missed, as it generally has been up to now, with Woodard's book connecting Vishnu to the pillar deity Terminus of Rome being a notable positive exception. Let's go through the avatars and attributes of Vishnu now, and note how an overwhelming number of them all happen to be found in Cú Chulainn, or his Germanic parallel, Fenrir, who we connected in our previous videos. Remember that Cú Chulainn is pacified by 3 successive containments until he is neutralized, and then later binds himself to a stone before his sword falls to sever the hand of his Tyr-type opponent, Lugith, in a cause and effect reaction. This is the direct parallel between Cú Chulainn's binding and Fenrir's binding. Please see these previous videos for more information. First, we have Vishnu's son, Vrka, or wolf, and who in the Skanda Purana is bound by Skanda, in a myth that is very similar to the binding of the wolf Fenrir. This story of the binding of Varaha's son Vrka by Skanda and his associates is found only in the archaic version of the Skanda Purana, chapter 110. Credit to the blogger Manasataramgini for pointing out that this is the closest parallel to Fenrir in all of Indian myth. Now, this is Vishnu's son who parallels Fenrir here. But keep in mind that we are looking at a whole constellation of myths, and when we see how all of the other parallels to Fenrir and Cú Chulainn point to Vishnu, this myth pointing to Vishnu's son becomes obviously relevant. Also, in Indian myth, a son of a god is sometimes or even frequently seen as an extension or incarnation of that god. And this must be something like what is happening here, given the other parallels we see. Thus, we begin with a direct and almost undeniable parallel to Fenrir and a son of Vishnu. The plot apparently thickens, however, because as a footnote by the editor of the critical edition of the Skanda Purana states, quote, Koka Vaktra, the Gana of Skanda, addresses Vrka as Sukareshvara, which indicates that he is a boar, just like his father, unquote. It is odd because the editor elsewhere calls Vrka a cub, but if this footnote is true, then we have a son named Wolf, but who is somehow a boar, and who is tied up and imprisoned by a son of Shiva, before that son of Shiva kills the boar father, who is a form of Vishnu, Varaha. All this being said, we have here a strange overlapping of the boar and wolf in the bound beast, who is an offshoot of Vishnu, reminding us of how the Gaelic boar of 4 Mile is in the mythic position of Fenrir, who is the bound wolf. The interchange or overlap of the boar and wolf that could be happening here, then, seems to even be an issue in the Indic tradition. Cú Chulainn likewise is the hound who is bound, and in very similar circumstances to the wolf Fenrir, who also is bound to a stone, like Cú Chulainn, in Gylfaginning. Next is the parallel that first suggested to me that Cú Chulainn could be the Vishnu parallel. Vishnu's avatar, Krishna, is in a contested love triangle with the fire god's wife. Agni's wife, Svaha, falls in love with Krishna, but he sends her back, saying she can only be his lover after being lover of Agni for a time. This characteristic myth pattern is found in European myth. The fire god Hephaestus' wife, Aphrodite, is in a love triangle too, this time with the war god Ares. In this case, the fire god catches the two together in his magical net and displays their shame to the other gods. If the parallel holds, this places Ares, god of war, in the position of Krishna in relation to the love triangle with the fire god's wife. In both cases, this love triangle is contested in a similar way. In Gaelic myth, this myth is very much preserved. The Gaelic Agni, as I've explained again and again, is Manannán, and his wife Fand falls in love with the warrior Cú Chulainn. When Manannán finally catches up to them trying to meet, he shakes his magical cloak between her and Cú Chulainn, causing them to forget one another. So the magical cloak is in a similar position to the net of Hephaestus here, and in each case, the love triangle is interrupted and the wife generally sent back to her fire god husband, in one way or another, as also Krishna sends Svaha back to her fire god husband. This is yet another example of why understanding that Manannán is the fire god is so crucial. Time and again, Manannán appears in key fire god roles. You will not go as far as you could in the understanding of Celtic myth if you don't first establish that Manannán is Agni, the shapeshifter fire god who dwells in the water and occasionally crafts weapons for the gods, just as Agni does. This parallel then directly equates Cú Chulainn with Krishna. Next, the characteristic description of Cú Chulainn, repeated over and over again, corresponds exactly to two of Vishnu's avatars. This is easily missed, but given the context of all the parallels we are listing, it should not be ignored. The coincidences begin to pile too high after a while. Cú Chulainn's characteristic physical description is always that he is dark and small. This stands out since great warrior heroes aren't often small, nor even very often dark in European lore, let alone both dark and small at once. We read, quote, "Tell me then, who would be likely to have come to us? Nay, who but the little lad, my foster son, and the foster son of Connor, Cú Chulainn na Cairda." Unquote. Cú Chulainn describes himself as small when talking to Etarcomol. Quote, "But if only you knew it, the little creature you are looking at, namely myself, is wrathful." Unquote. Etarcomol himself describes Cú Chulainn like this, quote, "I swear by the gods whom I worship, never to retreat until I carry off as a trophy the head of yon little deer, Cú Chulainn." Unquote. As commentator Neeja from sheneolas.wordpress.com says, quote, "Both Kur and Locke object to the idea of fighting him on the grounds that he is just a, quote, stripling, unquote, a term that may be more to do with his youth than his height, but which looks like it carries implications of being small. O twisted imp, or a Shirite Shiabarti, is a common insult used against Cú Chulainn. It possibly draws attention to his warp spasm, or riastrav, and his height simultaneously. Shirite, S-I-R-I-T-E, sometimes translated as imp or sprite, also carries connotations of the supernatural. This is usually a mildly contemptuous term applied to Cú Chulainn by both friends and enemies, and can imply imp, stripling, sprig, whippersnapper. His charioteer, Lag, repeatedly calls him, quote, little Cú, unquote, that is, little hound, too many times to cite individually. It's his primary nickname for him. This name is also used by Ferdia, as is imp/Shirite. Other instances call him a, quote, little lamb, unquote, and, quote, a small, dark-browed man, but very resplendent, unquote. Now it just so happens that Vishnu is Krishna, which name means dark. Krishna is the Dark One, and Cú Chulainn is dark. Vishnu then is also Vamana, his dwarf avatar. That is to say, he is the god who has a dwarf form. he is the god who is notably short, at least in this form. So when Cú Chulainn is said to be dark and small, that is directly equal to saying Vishnu is Krishna and Vamana, dark and the dwarf, only that these features are concentrated together in the singular Cú Chulainn. Again, Cú Chulainn is like all of the avatars of Vishnu compressed in one. As noted, one of the words used to describe Cú Chulainn, Shaivite, translates as imp. So Cú Chulainn is being called imp, while Vishnu is literally the dwarf. Next, Vishnu is called cattle protector, Govinda, while Cú Chulainn has as his most prominent role in his entire mythos, cattle protector. Cú Chulainn's epic centers around a cattle raid upon his kingdom, in which he is the central defender on his side, the leading bulwark against the theft of cattle specifically, and indeed, by far, the most prominent cattle protector in all of Celtic tradition. Cú Chulainn protects the cattle, while the Sama to Vishnu keeps the cattle from leaving. His 3 strides are said to have retrieved them. For instance, from the Panka Vimsa Brahmana, quote, Prajapati created the domestic animals, the cattle, the cows. These being created left him. And then, he said about them to Vishnu, quote, Try thou to reach these for me, unquote. Vishnu reached them through the 4th extra laud, the 21-versed stoma. Through the Varavantiya Saman, he restrained them from passing away farther, Avarayata. With the verse, Here did Vishnu stride, he strode, unquote. Panka Vimsa Brahmana 20.3.2. The strides of Vishnu are thus referred to in regards to restraining animals from running away from sacrifices, therefore guarding animals. Thus, Cú Chulainn is easily the equivalent of Govinda, cattle protector. The coincidences continue to pile up. Vishnu both establishes and maintains the boundary of the sacred space per the Vedic evidence discussed in Woodard's aforementioned book. These roles, among other things, lend themselves to the general view of Vishnu as the preserver. Thus, Cú Chulainn, as the defender of Ulster and protector of its cattle, is the Gaelic equivalent of Vishnu as preserver and protector of the boundary. Vishnu, as Roger Woodard emphasizes, is identified with the Vedic sacrificial post, the yupa, and in his Narasimha form, he is said also to emerge from a pillar. Hence why the Roman pillar god and boundary protector, Terminus, is the likely Roman parallel, according to Woodard. Terminus is represented simply by a pillar or post, comparable to the yupa, which stands as a boundary marker. Cú Chulainn, on the other hand, is killed tied to a standing stone, much like a pillar. In this way, it can be said that he becomes one with a pillar or standing stone, or is being identified with a pillar-like stone in death, in a fairly clear sacrificial tableau. Vishnu, as mentioned, is the god of Tejas, or passionate heat and light, who even gives Tejas to other gods. Cú Chulainn is shown to generate huge amounts of heat in 2 different scenes, when he melts the snow around him as he's sitting, and then when he heats the water of the vats, causing them to burst. From the Tanbokulnya, we read of this Tejas-like heat. And remember also that Narasimha, Vishnu, is considered a lord of yoga. Quote, Heavy snow fell that night, so that all the 5 provinces of Erin were a white plain with the snow. And Cú Chulainn doffed the 70 waxed, board-like tunics, which were used to be held under cords and strings next his skin, in order that his sense might not be deranged when the fit of his fury came on him. And the snow melted for 30 feet all around him because of the intensity of the warrior's heat and the warmth of Cú Chulainn's body. And the Gila remained a good distance from him, for he could not endure to remain near him because of the might of his rage and the warrior's fury and the heat of his body. Unquote. From the Tanbokulnya, chapter 9, the Proposals. And then, quote, "It was there Cú Chulainn had doffed his tunic, and the deep snow was around him, where he sat, up to his belt, and the snow had melted a cubit around him for the greatness of the heat of the hero," unquote, from chapter 12c. Narasimha also is described as fiery or giving off heat in multiple sources, such as the Ugram Viram Maha Vishnum mantra. This describes Narasimha Vishnu as, quote, "burning from all sides," unquote, using the word jvalantam, meaning burning or blazing, which could similarly refer to generating heat from his body. This is from the Narasimha Purvatapini Upanishad in the Purva Bhaga, or first part of the Upanishad, and also the Narasimha Kavacha mantra, which reads, quote, "O angry and brave Mahavishnu, your heat and fire permeate everywhere," unquote. This mantra from the Narasimha Kavacha also uses the word jvalantam to describe Vishnu/Narasimha, meaning burning or blazing. This mantra is from the Brahmanda Purana, specifically from the Narasimha Kavacha Stotra, or Narasimha Kavacham. The Linga Purana 95.17 reads, quote, "Then the dispeller of sins, Narasimha, killed that Daitya along with his kinsmen. Like a fire of annihilation at the close of yugas, he harassed the leading Daitya. O Brahmins of good holy rites, the entire universe became terrified due to the terrible roar of Narasimha. All the worlds, beginning with the world of Brahma, trembled. On seeing Narasimha, Devas, Asuras, Nagas, Siddhas, Sadhyas, Vishnu, Brahma, and others left off their courage and strength and went off in different directions in order to protect their lives. When they had gone, the Lord Narasimha, who had 1,000 shapes, who had all feet and all arms, who had 1,000 eyes, whose 3 eyes were the moon, sun, and fire, who was the wielder of Maya, remained there enveloping everything," unquote. And we see already the suggestions of a Fenrir-type fearsomeness and rampaging aspect. Also from the Linga Purana, 96.12 through 16, we read, quote, "A great terrible fear has cropped up untimely unto Devas. The fire of Narasimha is blazing. He cannot be approached. Subdue him," unquote. And then the Linga Purana 96.25, quote, "Thus addressed in mild words by Virabhadra, Lord Narasimha, man-lion, blazed more than before with extremely terrible wrath," unquote. Furthermore, Cú Chulainn has his famous Lon Laith, or hero light, a beam of light that surrounds and projects from his forehead, especially during battle. So Cú Chulainn clearly has a power of both intense heat and light, perfectly matching the Tejas and the banner of Tejas that Vishnu specially has. The hero light over the head of Cú Chulainn seems to nicely parallel the banner of radiant Tejas that Vishnu would hold up during battle. Vishnu's avatar Narasimha, in particular, is described as having radiant Tejas in multiple sources, including the Bhagavata Purana 7.8.25, which, describing Narasimha, reads, quote, "It is not at all surprising that the Supreme Soul, who in the past has, by his own Tejas, Svatejasa, vanquished the greatest of demons, should now, filled with fury, approach and strike with his mace the mighty demon Hiranyakashipu," unquote. And in the Bhagavata Purana 7.8.33, we read, quote, "With him, Narasimha, tossing his hair, the celestial chariots crowding in the sky were shoved from their places. The earth shook under the heavy weight of his feet. His intolerable force moved the mountains and hills, and his effulgence, Tat Tejasa, outshone everything else in all directions of the sky," unquote. The Bhagavata Purana 7.8.39 reads, quote, "All the devotees of Vishnu, including Sunanda, Kumuda, and others, with their hands raised in reverence, sitting in front of him, worship the fierce one, Narasimha, who has intense radiance, Tivra Tejasam, who was seated like a lion among men, not far off, each separately." Unquote. As Vishnu has a terrifying animal form, the man-lion Narasimha, who goes on a rampage, threatening both friend and foe, as just described, so Cú Chulainn also becomes a terrifying, animalistic monster that doesn't heed friend or foe and would wreak havoc if not stopped. Remember, his very name implies that he is an animal, specifically, though, a hound. Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster. This fearsome and indiscriminate animalistic form is described in his warp spasm form, when he twists into an unheard-of animalistic monster, and specifically when the men of Evin Macha prophesy that he will destroy them as he's returning from battle if they don't cool his battle rage and subdue him. This is when they place him in the vats of water. The men of Ulster, seeing Cú Chulainn approach Evin Macha after battle, fear accurately that he will kill all in his path, even allies, if not pacified, saying, quote, "Unless he be attended to, all the youths of Evin will fall by his hand." Unquote. Cú Chulainn then proclaims directly, quote, "I swear by the God by whom the Ulstermen swear, if a man be not found to engage with me, I will spill the blood of every one in the dun." Unquote. They then have to pacify him with the vats until he is finally tranquilized. Vishnu is furthermore called a wild animal who roams in dangerous places in the Rigveda 1.154.2, further reinforcing this parallel at the Vedic level. Vishnu is a terrible animalistic deity. Quote, "For this his mighty deed is Vishnu lauded, like some wild beast, dread, prowling, mountain roaming, he within whose 3 wide extended paces all living creatures have their habitation." Unquote. The beast Vishnu is here described as is vague and unspecific, reminding us again of Cú Chulainn's unspecific animalistic battle form, or the fact that this god type takes multiple animal forms. Next, Vishnu and Cú Chulainn have parallel beheading scenes. In a less well-known myth, Vishnu in his form of Maha Vishnu, aka Mahavira, has a death scene where he is beheaded while holding off an army single-handedly. Now this is incredibly coincidental, because this is exactly how Cú Chulainn dies. He is facing down the entire army of Connacht, ending like Maha Vishnu with his beheading. As Wikipedia summarizes, quote, "In a legend relating to the Mahavira, Makha in the Panka Vimsa Brahmana, or Maha Vishnu in the Shatapatha Brahmana, and Taittiriya Aranyaka, is decapitated." Unquote. In the Panka Vimsa Brahmana version we read, quote, "The gods Agni, Indra, Vayu, and Makha, desirous of glory, performed a sacrificial session. They said, quote, 'The glory that will come to one of us must be in common to all of us.' Unquote. Of them it was Makha to whom the glory came. He took it and stepped forth. They tried to take it from him by force and hemmed him in. He stood there, leaning on his bow, but the end of the bow, springing upwards, cut off his head. This head became the Pravargya. Makha, forsooth, is the Yagya. By holding the Pravargya ceremony, they put the head on the Yagya, or the sacrifice." Unquote. From the Panka Vimsa Brahmana 7, Adhyaya 5, the Samans of the midday Pavamana Laud, verse 6. Alternate versions of this exact legend are contained in the Shatapatha Brahmana, white Yajurveda, and the Taittiriya Aranyaka, black Yajurveda, where it is Vishnu that completes the yagya and is decapitated thus, although he is still referred to as Makha in the Pravargya ritual. Second, again as detailed below, the head is symbolically the highest, best, or most important, and thus the Pravargya ceremony as the head of the Soma Yagya is the highest, best, or most important part of it." Unquote. The Shatapatha Brahmana version of this myth makes it even clearer that this Makha Vishnu is the god who cannot restrain his hunger for glory, just as Cú Chulainn sacrifices long life for glory, and like Fenrir, allows himself to be bound due to his hunger for glory, and is also called Fame Wolf as his main epithet, Hrothvitnir. Quote, Now he who is this Vishnu is the yagya, or sacrifice, and he who is this yagya is yonder Aditya, the sun. But indeed, Vishnu was unable to control that love of glory of his, and so even now, not everyone can control that love of glory of his. Taking his bow, together with 3 arrows, he stepped forth. He stood, resting his head on the end of the bow. Not daring to attack him, the gods sat themselves down all around him. Then the ants said, these ants, Vamri, doubtless, were that kind called Upadika, "What would ye give to him who should gnaw the bowstring?" "We would give him the constant enjoyment of food, and he would find water even in the desert. So we would give him every enjoyment of food." "So be it," they said. Having gone nigh unto him, they gnawed his bowstring. When it was cut, the ends of the bow, springing asunder, cut off Vishnu's head. It fell with the sound, green, and on falling it became yonder sun. And the rest of the body lay stretched out, with the top part towards the east. And inasmuch as it fell with the sound, green, therefrom Garma was called. And inasmuch as he was stretched out, Pravrig, therefrom the Pravargya took its name. The gods spake, "Verily our great hero, Mahanvira, has fallen. Therefrom the Mahavira pot was named. And the vital sap which flowed from him they wiped up, Samrig, with their hands, whence the Samrag." Unquote. From the Shatapatha Brahmana, Kanda 14, Adhyaya 1, Brahmana 1, the Pravargya, verses 6 through 11. And note that the ants, interestingly enough, hold a position very similar to the Morrigan in the Gaelic myth. The Morrigan being the one who sneakily weakens Cú Chulainn so that he can be killed, while the ants gnaw the bowstring, causing Vishnu to become decapitated. In short, Vishnu is directly connected to a hunger for glory that he can't restrain, exactly like Cú Chulainn and Fenrir. And this story of Makha Vishnu's beheading while facing down an entire army thus is the direct parallel of Cú Chulainn's beheading. We can then say that Cú Chulainn's death could have a similar underlying ritual meaning, where his severed head can become identified with the head of the sacrifice that he has become with his death.
Remember that in Gylfaginning chapter 34, when the Aesir make the second fetter to try and hold Fenrir, they bid the wolf to try the fetter, quote, saying that he would become very famous for strength if such huge workmanship should not suffice to hold him, unquote. And then, quote, it came into his mind that he must expose himself to danger if he would become famous, so he let the fetter be laid upon him, unquote. And when they make the final, deceptively thin fetter, he again sees it in terms of the glory it will bring him. And this is why his most remembered epithet is Fame Wolf. Quote, then the wolf answered, touching this matter of the ribbon, it seems to me that I shall get no glory of it, though I snap asunder so slender a band, unquote. In the same vein, Cú Chulainn, of course, also forsakes the safety of a long life and trades it for fame when he hears Kavath's prophecy. He is the hero driven by the hunger for glory. Quote, then spake Kava, the little boy that takes arms this day shall be splendid and renowned for deeds of arms above the youths of Erin, and the tales of his high deeds shall be told forever, but he shall be short-lived and fleeting. Cú Chulainn overheard what he said, though far off at his playfeats, southwest of Evan, and he threw away all his playthings and hastened to Conchovar's sleep-room to ask for arms. Unquote.
Vishnu's famous 3 steps, found in the Vedas, has no clearer parallel anywhere than in Cú Chulainn's famous triple salmon leap. Yes, Cú Chulainn has a triple leap, as Vishnu has his triple step. The triple salmon leap is the parallel of Vishnu's 3 steps, since the jump to the start of the bridge that he does here would be counted as the first step. To be technical, the second, more vertical leap may specifically be the salmon leap portion, but it is presented as a part of a triple leap. Note that Vishnu's leap is often mapped onto the arc of the sun, so that the first step is the low point of sunrise, the second step is the peak of the arc, and the third step is the setting, returning back to earth. Or it is mapped onto an ascending path leading beyond the sun to the Brahman itself. Either of these could map to what we see of the pattern of Cú Chulainn's leaps over the bridge. Furthermore, Donal Mildemail is the name of the king of Alba, where the bridge takes Cú Chulainn, and we know from the Welsh parallel that Dunwall Moelmud is a name of the Welsh Brahman. Dunwall is the cognate of Donal, and Moelmud is a strong sound-alike to Mildemail. So Cú Chulainn's Donal is probably a cognate of Welsh Dunwall, and thus a figure who personifies the Brahman here. As such, Cú Chulainn's triple leap across the bridge has seemingly led him to the land of the Brahman, in a symbolic sense, exactly as Vishnu's 3 steps lead him to the Brahman. Alba, or Scotland here, thus stands for the land of the Brahman. Of course, we aren't looking at an exact duplicate in every outward detail, but this is too strikingly close of a pattern, in context with all the other parallels. As we read from the wooing of Ever, quote, "For on this wise was that bridge. It had 2 low heads and the mid-space, and whenever anybody would leap on to its one head, the other head would lift itself up and throw him on its back. Cú Chulainn then tried 3 times to cross the bridge and could not do it. The men jeered at him. Then he grew mad and jumped on the head of the bridge, that's 1 leap, and made the hero's salmon leap so that he got on its midst, that's 2 leaps. And the other head of the bridge had not yet fully raised itself when he reached it and threw himself from it, and was on the ground of the island, that's 3 leaps." Unquote. This is also how he gets Ever. Quote, "Jenny grande," she said, i.e., she would not come with me unless I jumped the hero's salmon leap across the 3 ramparts to reach her. Cú Chulainn then wanted to go to the Rath of Forgall, and the scythe chariot was prepared for Cú Chulainn that day. It was called scythe chariot, Carpat Serda, for the iron scythes that were from it, or again because it was first invented by the Syrians. He then arrived at the Rath of Forgall and jumped the hero's salmon leap across the 3 ramparts, so that he was on the ground of the Dun." Unquote. This is again characterized as a sort of triple leap, leaping across 3 ramparts.
The end of the story, The Sickbed of Cú Chulainn, after Fand leaves Cú Chulainn, actually includes him performing 3 leaps into the air, then 3 leaps abroad, and finally being bound hand and foot and pacified by the Druids of Ulster, who he tries to kill at this time. This strongly again reminds us of Fenrir and the themes surrounding him. Quote, "Then Cú Chulainn bounded 3 times high into the air, and he made 3 great leaps toward the south, and thus he came to Tara Luachra, and there he abode for a long time, having no meat and no drink, dwelling upon the mountains, and sleeping upon the high road that runneth through the midst of Luachra. Then Ever went to Evan, and there she sought out King Conor, and she told Conor of Cú Chulainn's state, and Conor sent out his learned men and the people of skill, and the Druids of Ulster, that they might seek for Cú Chulainn, and might bind him fast, and bring him with them to Evan. And Cú Chulainn strove to slay the people of skill, but they chanted wizard and fairy songs against him, and they bound fast his feet and his hands, until he came a little to his senses. Then he begged for a drink at their hands, and the Druids gave him a drink of forgetfulness, so that afterwards he had no more remembrance of Fand, nor of anything else that he had done then. And they also gave a drink of forgetfulness to Ever, that she might forget her jealousy, for her state was in no way better than the state of Cú Chulainn. And Manannán shook his cloak between Cú Chulainn and Fand, so that they might never meet together again throughout eternity." Unquote. Thus Cú Chulainn once again is bound like a dangerous animal trying to kill his captors, and this is tied together with the other motifs of the story, including a triple leap. "He is the triple bounding hound who is bound."
As mentioned, Vishnu is hymned as Avaya Marut, the exemplar or lead Marut, or warband member, in Rig Veda 5.87. Cú Chulainn is the best warrior among his own warband, the Red Branch Knights, and when he first encounters the other boys of Connor's fortress, they are forced to request to be placed under his protection when he overcomes them all single-handedly. This could point to a similar concept, that Cú Chulainn subsumes in himself the power of the whole warband and is their exemplar and leader. This is solidified when Cú Chulainn later woos and retrieves Ever, and then it is said of him that he was given the headship of the young warriors and other men. Quote, "And then Cú Chulainn was given the headship of the young men of Ulster, of the warriors, the poets, the trumpeters, the musicians, the 3 pipers, the 3 jesters to say sharp words, the 3 distributors of fame. It is of them the poet spake, and set out their names, and it is what he said. Quote, the young men of Ireland, when they were in the Red Branch, it is they were the fairest of all hosts." Unquote. And of Cú Chulainn he said, quote, "He is as hard as steel, and as bright, Cú Chulainn, the victorious son of Dectera." Unquote, unquote. A smaller point, but as Vishnu has the lion form Narasimha, so Cú Chulainn meets a lion in his path on the way to Ska. The lion mirrors his movements to prevent him from passing at first, and then Cú Chulainn rides on its back. It's a curious scene where a lion becomes like a mirror and then a vehicle to Cú Chulainn, and since lions are not at all common in Celtic material, this stands out as a possible remnant of a more archaic lion connection in Cú Chulainn's mythos. Possibly worth noting, Cú Chulainn is a precocious youth who does amazing feats as a small child, like Krishna. Being a cattle protector is a job also connected to the boyhoods of both, as Cú Chulainn becomes the stand-in hound protector of Cullen when he is just a boy. The precociousness and general beast-slaying stories of the childhoods of both might be worth comparing thematically as well, as there are similarities. Next, Cú Chulainn throws his weapon with his foot, while Vishnu is heavily associated with the foot, and his 3 steps are his most famous Rigvedic legend, highlighting the particular power of his feet and legs. Cú Chulainn's relationship with Fergus, the Indra parallel, is very similar to that between Vishnu and Indra. Vishnu is known as Upendra, or Little Indra, and is sometimes called a son of Indra. They are battle partners, and Vishnu gives Tejas to Indra in battle. Meanwhile, Cú Chulainn is the foster son of the older Fergus, parallel of Indra, and they are friends who deeply regret having to fight one another in the end. As explained in my previous videos on Cú Chulainn and Fionn, after he is killed, Cú Chulainn secretly reincarnates into a sort of doomsday form, the rampaging boar of 4 Mile. This is proven by the fact that Cú Chulainn and the boar have the same unique poetic description given to no other 2 figures in Irish tradition, and the fact that Cú Chulainn and the boar both blatantly parallel different portions of Fenrir's mythos. These points then reinforce one another, and we can conclude that the boar is an incarnation of the same god that Cú Chulainn embodies. For instance, of Cú Chulainn it is said, quote, "The hair of his head twisted like the tangle of a red thorn bush stuck in a gap. If a royal apple tree with all its kingly fruit were shaken above him, scarce an apple would reach the ground, but each would be spiked on a bristle of his hair as it stood up on his scalp with rage." Unquote. And of the boar of 4 Mile we read, quote, "And it raised the mane of its back on high, so that a plump wild apple would have stuck on each of its rough, horrid bristles." Unquote. Cú Chulainn parallels Fenrir in his neutralizing and binding, and his love of glory, while the boar parallels Fenrir in the manner of his death, the knee or foot of his slayer being placed on his lower jaw, while the upper jaw is stretched wide and the internal organs are attacked. And with Fenrir being the direct cause of Odin's death, and the boar being instead the omen of Finn's death, with Odin and Finn being parallels, while the slayer of the beast is either the son or grandson of Odin or Finn, respectively. Thus, the boar is Fenrir in his final rampage. Thus we have a boar form connected to this god, just as Vishnu has the boar avatar Varaha. This rampaging boar is then also similar to the rampaging Narasimha, but having the form of the boar avatar. Some of these elements were apparently switching around in transmission, with the boar form being used by the Celts where we would expect the Narasimha or Fenrir type mythic role. But the added context allows us to see that this doesn't matter much, since the underlying god has both animal forms. So if they switch around in different traditions, it hasn't affected the core theology. The rampaging boar of 4 Mile is killed by a grandson of Fionn in a scene that seems to parallel the death of Fenrir, as I have described in my previous videos. The boar is the omen of the oncoming death of Fionn, while Fenrir instead directly kills Odin, and the grandson of Fionn kills the boar by placing his knee on its lower jaw and stretching its upper jaw wide, then having his men pull out its entrails, while the son of Odin places his foot on the lower jaw of Fenrir and stretches his upper jaw wide, and then stabs his organs through his mouth. The crowning parallel, and the one that clinches the equivalency, is that between the Fenrir and 4 Mile boar myth thus described, and the rampage of Narasimha, as found particularly in the Shiva Purana, Linga Purana, and Sharabha Upanishad, with Odin and Finn as the equivalents of Shiva, and Fenrir and the boar of 4 Mile as the equivalents of Narasimha. An uncanny similar pattern unfolds. Let's read. From the Shiva Purana, quote, "When Vishnuji took his incarnation of Narasimha to kill the demon king Hiranyakashipu, his anger could not be subdued even after the killing of Hiranyakashipu. His anger had frightened all the 3 worlds. Lord Brahma sent Prahlada to Narasimha so that his anger gets cooled down. Prahlada prayed to Narasimha. Narasimha took him in his embrace, but still his anger was not subdued." Unquote. Quote, "When Virabhadra, Shiva's avatar, politely requested Narasimha, Vishnu avatar, to cool down, he, Narasimha, tried to pounce on him, Virabhadra. Right then, Lord Shiva appeared in his most devastating form. He was looking frightening in his giant form and with thousands of hands. His appearance was resembling a huge cannibal bird, Sharabha. Lord Shiva injured Narasimha with his giant wings, and after carrying Lord Vishnu in his giant wings, and after carrying Lord Vishnu in his arms, he flew in the sky. Lord Shiva wore the head of Narasimha with the garland of skulls on his neck. The remaining body was carried by Virabhadra and abandoned at a mountain." Unquote. From Shiva Purana 1.3.11. So the avatar that Shiva first confronts Narasimha in here is Virabhadra. It seems the Shaivites of this tradition didn't think Shiva's highest essence sullied itself with the confrontation with Narasimha, and so Virabhadra is his active stand-in for the beginning of the battle. Thus, with Shiva Virabhadra as equivalent of Odin in the battle, we see that both Virabhadra and Odin confront the rampaging beast, Narasimha or Fenrir, and are then attacked by it. Narasimha pounces at Virabhadra, while at this point Fenrir actually devours Odin. We can see that the Shaivites may have downplayed the violence inflicted on their chief god here, whereas Odin and Fionn both die or are omened to die by the beast that they confront. Nonetheless, the moments are dramatically equivalent. After the beast has attacked or tried to attack the active form of Odin or Shiva, Virabhadra, a new offshoot of Odin or Shiva has to step in to fight the beast in place of the one who was attacked. That is, when Odin is killed by Fenrir, his son, Vidar, steps in as an avenger who defeats Fenrir when his own father could not. Also, Oskar, grandson of Fionn, steps in here to defeat the boar of 4 Mile. Likewise, Virabhadra Shiva, having been pounced at, emanates a new form called Sharabha, who likewise is specially able to overpower Narasimha and complete the battle, when even Virabhadra had not done so. If we see Vidar, son of Odin, as a natural continuation of the deity of his father Odin, but in a specialized avenging form, then he can be seen as precisely like Sharabha, who is this specialized form in relation to Shiva/Virabhadra. Both Fenrir and Narasimha are rather brutally killed, though obviously Vidar is not in the form of a bird like Sharabha is. Thus we end up with Sharabha equals Vidar equals Oscar. The birth of Skanda/Kartikeya is more like that of Finn's son Oisin, and so that seems to imply that Oscar/Vidar would be more like Sharabha and not like Skanda. But we can posit some overlap of these if evidence suggests it.
The archaic Skanda Purana actually describes Sharabha as using his feet, roaring, and then stepping on Narasimha in order to cause him to leave his lion avatar body, that is, to defeat him, much like how Vidar defeats Fenrir by stepping with his powerful foot. Quote, "Of colossal strength, with sharp fangs, using his 4 rear feet, he went over to the man-lion, Narasimha, and calmly roared." And then further along, "And then that most excellent Sharabha stepped on the lion with his feet. He caused Kesava, that is, Vishnu, to take on his divine form once more. The god who has the bull as his banner, that is Rudra or Shiva, having given Vishnu a boon, namely that he would slay the Daityas, said to him, 'Be as you were before,' and vanished." Unquote. This is from the archaic Skanda Purana version of Narasimha's defeat, found in Skanda Purana BH 71.1-7, 3. If we put this together with the other versions where Sharabha tears or breaks Narasimha with his claws, we have him stepping on Narasimha with his feet and tearing or breaking him. This is remarkably similar to what Vidar and Oscar do to kill Fenrir and the boar, especially the emphasized use of the foot to step on the beast to cause his final defeat before stretching him apart.
Oscar, like Vidar and Sharabha, finds that he alone is destined to be the avenger who will slay the rampaging beast. Quote, "And when the valiant warlike Oscar, son of Oisin, saw the number of warriors and hounds and men that had fallen by the swine, there arose a great passion of wrath and a high, fierce, terrible, strange tempest in the soul of the noble warrior on beholding the bone-breaking which the wild, baneful boar had wrought on the hounds and men and on the noble leaders of the Fian. Nor did the royal warrior think it honorable and worthy that anyone should avenge upon it the evil it had done, except himself. Great was the fear and fright caused by the boar upon the hosts, and great was the dread and horror upon Oscar. However, he could not avoid it once he had beheld it. And when Oscar had come on to the spot, a wide passage was made for him towards that red-mouthed beast, which was like a furious bear and a phantom of destruction and a conglomeration of battle and ruin." In the Linga Purana version, this pattern of the first active form of Shiva, that is Virabhadra, confronting and being attacked by Narasimha, and then Sharabha being formed in response to finally defeat Narasimha, is also present in a bit more detail. Quote, "Parameshvara, that is Shiva, the abode of mercy, resolved to curb the powerful lord called Narasimha. For that purpose he remembered Virabhadra of great strength. Virabhadra was the terrible form of himself and the cause of the great dissolution. Immediately he came smiling in front of the Lord at the head of the Ganas." Unquote. Virabhadra confronts Narasimha and tells him to desist. Then Narasimha speaks, giving voice to his plan to annihilate the universe. Quote, "Do not be presumptuous enough to advise me what is beneficial to me. I shall now annihilate this universe of the mobile and immobile things. There can't be the annihilation of the annihilator at his own hands or from others. My sway extends everywhere. There is none to boss over me." Unquote. Virabhadra responds, referencing numerous defeats of Vishnu, including the aforementioned myth of his boar avatar being defeated by Shiva's son Skanda. Quote, "Have you forgotten that your physical form of the boar was tormented by Skanda, the enemy of Taraka, with an imprecation and curved fang was partially uprooted?" Unquote. Narasimha then attacks Virabhadra. This causes a transformation of Virabhadra into Sharabha. Sharabha then throttles Narasimha, makes him submit, and renders him unconscious, defeating him. Quote, "Narasimha, who was thus addressed, became agitated through anger. He roared, and then seized Virabhadra with the force and velocity of his body. In the meantime, the extremely terrible form of Virabhadra, born of the brilliant splendor of Shiva, manifested itself as invincible, spreading through the firmament and causing terror among his enemies. It was not a golden splendor. It was not one pertaining to the moon or the sun, nor was it fiery in origin. It was not similar to lightning or the moonlight. It belonged to Maheshvara, Shiva, and it was incomparable. Then all fiery splendor merged into the splendor of Shankara, Shiva. The highly brilliant and immanent, i.e. Virabhadra, became manifest. He assumed a hideous form characteristic of Rudra. Then Parameshvara became visible in the form of the Annihilator. Raising auspicious shouts of victory, Devas stood observing. Virabhadra adopted 1,000 arms. His hairs were matted. The crescent moon adorned his head. Half of his body was in animals. This was the Sharabha form. With wings and a beak, he was a bird. His great curved fangs were very sharp. Adamantine claws were his weapons." Unquote. Quote, "Then Virabhadra, note as Sharabha, seized him, tying up his legs, that is Narasimha's, with his tail and enclosing the region of his arms within his arms. He whirled him, or shook him, with his wings, clutching at his umbilicus and feet, and hit in his chest. Just as the bird of prey lifts up a serpent and flies high up into the sky, so also Virabhadra Sharabha lifted up Narasimha. He was followed by devas and sages out of fright. Sometimes he lifted up man-lion, Narasimha, and sometimes he let him fall down. Soaring high up into the air, he struck him with his wings and rendered him unconscious." Unquote. And further, quote, "The delighted man-lion thus submitted to Shankara, that is Shiva. Then Virabhadra said, 'O Vishnu, you are indeed a weakling. You have been defeated till the end of your life.' Then Virabhadra, as Sharabha, skinned off his body, which was now left only with bone, and then reduced him to a mere face." Unquote. Then the meaning of the encounter is given by Virabhadra Sharabha. Quote, "Just as water mixed with water, milk with milk, and ghee with ghee, all merge into one, in the same manner Vishnu has merged into Shiva. This deity, in the form of Narasimha, has great strength and is haughty. This man-lion has been made to function by him who causes the annihilation of the universe. He should be worshipped and made obeisance to by those who desire to achieve my pleasure." After saying this, Lord Virabhadra of great strength vanished there itself, even as all the Bhutas were watching. Ever since that day, Shankara, that is Shiva, is said to wear the skin of Narasimha as his garment. The lion's face is also set as the leading bead in the garland of skulls." Unquote. And from the Sharabha Upanishad, quote, "That very strong Maheshvara, that is Shiva, took the horrifying form of Sharabha and killed Narasimha, who was destroying the world. Sharabha is the avatar of Shiva, which is a combination of eagle, lion, and man. That god, with his sharp claws, tore Vishnu, who took the form of Narasimha. He who was wearing the hide became Virabhadra." Unquote. From the Sharabha Upanishad 3-4. There is even a version of this Sharabha mythos where he is killing Vishnu's boar form, which could point to why we have the boar form in the Gaelic parallel myth, the boar of 4 Mile. If both Vishnu avatars of lion and boar are killed by the same form of Shiva, Shiva Sharabha, in similar stories, then it's obvious how easily these details could switch around in different traditions. In the story of the killing of Varaha by Sharabha, there are even some similar motifs as are found in the Ragnarok myth of Fenrir's death. For instance, Varaha's sons are rampaging and destroying the world. Indeed, the havoc they wreak ultimately does destroy much of the world and even kills some of the gods. There is even a deluge, and in the end, Sharabha, quote, splits his, i.e. Varaha's, body, unquote, and a regenerative cycle is ultimately begun. This myth doesn't have the same double confrontation of one form of Shiva being attacked, then Sharabha appearing as avenger, that we see in the Narasimha rampage myth and in the Fenrir myth with Vidar, and thus it doesn't seem to be the direct match to the killing of Fenrir in this way. But we can guess that some of these shared motifs of rampage and world destruction might have been overlapping and combining in different ways in the different branches, since we can see they all come from the same Vishnu mythos. Ultimately, this is another parallel supporting the concept that Vishnu's avatars are firmly connected to rampaging, destroying the world, and being killed by Shiva's avatar Sharabha, or a son of Shiva, such as Skanda, aka Kartikeya. I'll give a brief summary of this Varaha myth so these shared motifs can be noted. The narrative begins with the gods complaining about the havoc wreaked by Vishnu's boar form, Varaha, and his three sons, Suvrita, Kanaka, and Gora. Their playful but reckless activities are causing devastation on Earth, breaking lakes, damaging sacred trees, and flooding the world by their jumps into the sea. Hearing the grievances, Vishnu decides to forsake his Varaha body due to its association with the sins of killing Brahmins and sexual impurity due to having intercourse with the goddess Prithvi while she was menstruating, that is, the goddess Earth. He expresses his desire to atone by giving up his boar form, but acknowledges needing Shiva's help to do so forcefully, as he is too attached to the enjoyment of this form. Shiva, in response, takes the form of Sharabha, a formidable creature with 8 legs and terrifying features, to combat Varaha and his sons. This leads to a fierce battle where both sides use various forms and illusions, causing widespread destruction. The battle results in significant cosmic disturbances, including the flooding of the earth and the death of many gods and celestial beings, and even the pronouncement that the world has been destroyed. After the destruction, Brahma pleads with Vishnu to restore the world. Vishnu then takes on the form of Matsya, the fish, to save the Vedas and the great sages by placing them in a boat, which he supports during the deluge. He also consoles Shiva, who has been severely beaten in the conflict. Vishnu, as Varaha, decides to end the chaos by allowing himself to be killed by Sharabha, thus fulfilling his promise to abandon the Varaha body for the welfare of the world. This act of sacrifice leads to the creation of new beings from the light emanating from Varaha and his sons, symbolizing a cycle of destruction and rebirth. The narrative concludes with the gods, including Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma, reaffirming their commitment to maintain cosmic order. Varaha's body is used symbolically in a grand sacrifice from which all life is rejuvenated, ensuring the world's continuation and balance. And Varaha is frequently called the sacrificial boar or the Yajna Varaha throughout this story. Varaha ends by saying, quote, "Prepare the sacrificial steak, Yupa, the symbol of my body, with the parts of my body," unquote, thus being identified with the sacrificial post, or pillar, and having his body sacrificially cut apart. With this Varaha myth in mind, and the Narasimha slaying myth, aforementioned, as well as the slaying of Varaha's wolf son Vrika, the parallels to the deaths of Fenrir and the Boar of 4 Mile are overwhelmingly accounted for by the details of the avatars and offshoots of Vishnu. And this story is told in the Kalika Purana, chapter 30. This version of the story is also alluded to in the Prapanchasara Tantra. So, to summarize this complex web, Cú Chulainn is Vishnu, paralleling myths from the majority of Vishnu's avatars, all in one figure, and in quite a lot of detail, too. Small, dark. Cú Chulainn, described as youthful and dark-haired, or dark-featured, often as notably smaller in stature. Vishnu. Krishna is known for his dark complexion, Shyam Sundar, and his dwarf form, Vamana, appears small before his cosmic expansion. Transforms into a beast-like form that others fear will kill friend and foe. Cú Chulainn undergoes the Riestrav, a transformation where he becomes monstrous, feared by all on the battlefield, feared even by his allies of Ulster. Vishnu. Narasimha, half man, half lion, emerges to kill Hiranyakashipu, so terrifying that even gods fear him. See also his Varaha form that also has to be pacified. Generates great heat from his body. Cú Chulainn, during his Riestrav, his body generates intense heat, symbolizing his rage and power. Vishnu. Narasimha's emergence is associated with great heat, and Vishnu's Tejas inherently involves heat as a symbol of divine energy. Krishna's revelation of the Vishvarupa, radiating immense light and energy, further parallels Cú Chulainn's luminous aspect. Generates light from his head. Cú Chulainn, the lawn laith or hero light, radiates from his forehead during his battle frenzy. Vishnu. Krishna's Vishvarupa in the Bhagavad Gita emits a blinding light, and Vishnu and Narasimha's Tejas is a form of divine luminosity. Performs a famous triple leap or triple step. Cú Chulainn, known for his salmon leap, which he uses in a triple jump when crossing the bridge to Skahak's fortress or to retrieve Ever. Vishnu. Vamana's 3 strides can be seen as equal to Cú Chulainn's 3 leaps, covering the earth, sky, and beyond, and symbolizing expansion and the attainment of the Brahman. Protector of cattle. Cú Chulainn defends Ulster's cattle during his childhood and notably during the War of the Tanbukulnya. Vishnu. Krishna is a protector of cows, Govinda, known for his love and care for them during his childhood in Vrindavan. Has his head cut off while facing down a whole army. Cú Chulainn confronts an entire army during his final battle, gets mortally wounded, ties himself to a standing stone to die standing, and is beheaded posthumously while facing his enemies, becoming thus a symbolic sacrifice. Vishnu as Makha. In the narrative from the Shatapatha Brahmana, Vishnu in the form of Makha or Mahavira faces down a whole army of opponents in a ritualistic context where his decapitation symbolizes a cosmic act of transformation or order, becoming thus a symbolic sacrifice. Is in a contested love triangle with the fire god's wife. Cú Chulainn is in a love triangle with the wife of the fire god Mananon, while Krishna is in a love triangle with the wife of the fire god Agni. In both cases, the wife is sent back to her original husband as well. The lead or exemplar warband member. Vishnu is called Evaya Marut, the exemplar or lead warband member, while Cú Chulainn beats the other boys of Evan Makha, and they have to seek protection under him. And later he is given the headship of the men of Ulster, and is also one of the main leaders among the warband of the Red Branch Knights. The bound wolf. Vishnu's son Virkha, or wolf, in the Skanda Purana is bound by Skanda in a myth that is very similar to the binding of Fenrir. Skanda then overcomes and kills Varaha, thus killing the boar form as well, much like Oscar does to the boar of 4 Mile. Protector of the boundary. Vishnu is the protector of the boundary of the Vedic sacrifice, while Cú Chulainn defends the boundary of Ulster. Identified with the pillar or standing stone. Vishnu is identified with the Yupa, sacrificial post or pillar, and bursts out of the pillar in his Narasimha form. Cú Chulainn is bound to a standing stone when he dies, thus becoming symbolically unified with what seems to be a sacrificial pillar. Hunger for glory. Makha Vishnu is noted for an unrestrained hunger for glory that eventually leads to his death. Cú Chulainn does likewise, as also does Fenrir. connected with the power of the feet. Vishnu is heavily connected with feet by his 3 steps, his stepping on Bali, and being connected to the feet of the Purusha. Cú Chulainn throws his weapon with his feet. Relationship with the thunder god. The relationship between Indra and Vishnu is very similar to the relationship between Fergus and Cú Chulainn, with Fergus being indeed the Indra parallel. Rampage and subduing myth. Avatars of Vishnu have a similar rampaging and subduing myth to the avatar of Cú Chulainn, who is the boar of 4 Mile. Shiva's avatar Virabhadra is pounced on by the rampaging Narasimha, and in response, Shiva emanates Sharabha, who kills Narasimha. This is more or less the same pattern as when the rampaging Fenrir kills Odin first, but then his offspring Vidar arises in turn and kills Fenrir. Now, in my book chapter and article about the Celtic Vishnu, I posit that the Gaelic god named Neit, N-E-I-T, who is presumably the Mars NATO of the continental Celts, is in fact the Celtic Vishnu. I still believe this. He is a god of war with a halo of passionate light in his Mars NATO form. He is a god of sacred space like Vishnu as the lord of a stone house in the Gaelic records of Neit. He is called dangerous as Neit, and his name means fighting or passion, and he is of course equated with the war god Mars in the Interpretatio Romana. Thus we know he was a god of war. Of course, he is probably closer to Ares than to Mars, according to the evidence we have just laid out, but these god types are so close that it can point to the same basic concept. He is clearly a god of war, even if the Romans equated him with Mars and weren't being quite so accurate. Neit is also very far up the genealogies of the gods, suggesting that he is one of the more primordial gods and not some small-time offshoot. Neit even comes before Delvaith, the Gaelic Purusha, in one of the Gaelic god genealogies. In fact, one step above Delvaith. This could be similar to the fact that Vishnu is seen as a sort of foundational step of the Purusha, laying the groundwork, if you will, of the Purusha and merging with it as it is formed. Therefore, Neit, being father of Delvaith, could echo this same order of events in the formation of the Purusha, going from Vishnu to the full Purusha. All of these things together, plus the always useful process of elimination, suggest that Neit is indeed the equivalent of Vishnu, and thus he is the god that incarnates as Cú Chulainn and the boar of 4 Mile. Please see my book chapter for the more detailed argument relating to Neit and Vishnu. The idea that Neit is Vishnu seemed also to be confirmed by the fact that the Welsh Nwython, N-W-Y-T-H-O-N, also known as Naeton, N-A-E-T-O-N, is in a position in his myth that I've shown to be a perfect match of the role of Vishnu in my Cernunnos video. As Vishnu is identified with the sacrifice of Daksha and is beheaded by Shiva there in the Linga Purana version, chapter 100, and in other versions Shiva makes Pushan eat the charged sacrifice, so Nwython, N-W-Y-T-H-O-N, as if he is becoming the sacrifice, has his heart taken out, and Gwyn, parallel of Shiva, makes Killidir the Wild eat it. We know the legendary figure Merlin the Wild is the Pushan type. See my book chapter and article on the topic. So it would not be a stretch to suggest that Killidir is a mythic variation on the same wild Pushanic deity as Merlin the Wild. And thus each part of the parallel would fit together nicely and result in a clearer equation of Nwython to Vishnu. Nwython would be Vishnu as the sacrifice itself, with his heart, the heart of the sacrifice, being forced upon the Pushanic Killidir the Wild to eat. Clearly, there is a large pattern of Vishnu avatars being killed by Shiva, his avatars or son, and the gods, and some amount of this is also there in the European branches, when we look at the deaths of Cú Chulainn, the Boar of Fourmile, Nuaithon, Fenrir, and Mythothin. In the Hindu context, there is also a deep meaning to these two Godhead deities, Shiva and Vishnu, coming into conflict, and it's hard to imagine some sense of this wasn't present in the European and Proto-Indo-European versions, given the Celtic and other evidence. Vishnu and Shiva are aspects of the Godhead, with Vishnu like the nuclear reactor of fiery energy that powers and expands the cosmos, undergirding it. His overflow of energy manifests as the embodiment of hunger for glory. His energy and firmness sustain and preserve the cosmos from its foundation up. He has to be reined in because, like a nuclear reactor, his outburst threatens all existence unless it is kept in bounds. In the end, as Sri Aurobindo says, he is, quote, Vishnu, the all-pervading, who in the Rig Veda has a close but covert connection and almost an identity with the other deity exalted in the later religion, Rudra. Vishnu's constant friendliness to man and his helping gods is shadowed by an aspect of formidable violence, quote, like a terrible lion ranging in evil and difficult places, unquote, which is spoken of in terms more ordinarily appropriate to Rudra. Rudra is the father of the vehemently battling Maruts. Vishnu is hymned in the last sukta of the fifth mandala under the name of Avaya Marut, as the source from which they sprang, that which they become, and himself identical with the unity and totality of their embattled forces. Rudra is the deva or deity ascending in the cosmos, Vishnu the same deva or deity helping and evoking the powers of the ascent, unquote. Whether we think this precisely captures the essence of the Rudra and Vishnu duality, something of the kind is happening in the Norse and Gaelic versions of the myth. Vishnu was apparently always somehow important within the Godhead. It's no mistake that the two most prominent divine heroes of Gaelic tradition are Cú Chulainn and Fionn, the lightly euhemerized versions of the Celtic Vishnu and Rudra Shiva. Nuaithon in the Welsh version becomes the sacrifice itself when his heart is eaten, which is the symbol of totality. Cú Chulainn leads the men of Ulster into a house where they become intoxicated, and their enemies try to burn them in the intoxication of the Ulstermen, a similar story to that of the Welsh Purusha Llasar, which could point to Cú Chulainn as the one who leads the way and lays the groundwork for the Purusha sacrifice. Echoing this, Nate is the father of the Purusha, also known as Delvaith, in the god genealogies of the Gaels, and Yochi Salvuide, Salbuide, who I suspect to be the Ulster cycle version of the higher Vishnu preceding Cú Chulainn, is the father of Ness, aka Vak Devi herself, and in that form would be prominent at the heart of the pre-cosmic Godhead. Indeed, how can the highest god of all, Odin, be killed by just any demonic wolf? What would this say about Odin? A straightforward explanation would be that Fenrir is, and always was, an opposing aspect of the Godhead, from the time when this myth was given form and meaning, and Odin and Fenrir are in a dance of divine forces beyond our simple comprehension. Perhaps only another aspect of Godhead could so fully overcome the highest god, Odin. The wolf is even symbolic of Odin's own warband. Vishnu, like Fenrir, embodies that warband as Avaya Marut, and its overwhelming force finally consumes the active form of Odin within the world. It would be a similar mistake not to see that Vidar and Oscar are extensions of Odin and Fionn respectively, just as the emanation Sharabha is of Shiva, and so the divinity of Odin never really dies here, but his form only undergoes transformation. Then, as Heinir, who is in fact Shiva, Odin ultimately survives Ragnarok completely, in his tranquil, passive, and prophetic aspect, despite what a surface-level reading would lead one to think. A centuries-old debate has raged between Shaivite and Vaishnavite traditions regarding whether the avatars of Vishnu were really killed by Shiva and his avatars, whether these events were only added in Shaivite texts or were removed in Vaishnavite ones. Vaishnavas even denigrate Shaivite Puranas like the Linga Purana as tamasic, or of the nature of darkness and ignorance. However, with this comparative analysis, we can finally see the answer to this question for ourselves, and it's plain what happened. The close match of the deaths of the European Vishnus to the deaths of the avatars of Vishnu himself, found in the Brahmanas and the Shaivite Puranas and Upanishads, tells us that the Shaivite versions of the myths are closer and simply more accurate to the original forms of the stories than the Vaishnava versions are, with the Vaishnava versions so often removing the deaths of the Vishnu avatars or airbrushing their rougher attributes, leading finally to a sanitized and lifeless Vishnu, a travesty and vandalism of Vishnu's own original tradition. The fact that even the double confrontation with Narasimha is there, where first Virabhadra is attacked by Narasimha and then Virabhadra reforms into Sharabha to defeat Narasimha in turn, confirms that even the intricate details of the basic pattern of events remain the same between the Shaivite version and the Norse version, wherein Odin is first attacked by Fenrir, and then his son, rather than emanation, Vidar, arises in turn to finally kill Fenrir. The same double confrontation pattern. Falsifying a god's tradition by smoothing out and erasing ancient details from it in an attempt to aggrandize the god and hide his defeats does not honor the god, but only serves the ego of the individual who engages in this practice. We can end this ancient debate if we look neutrally at what all the evidence from comparative mythology is plainly telling us. The Shaivite texts are vindicated, and the deeper meaning of Vishnu's mythos can then be appreciated for what it is, if truth is what we want. The far-reaching and specific matches between Vishnu's avatars and the various aspects of Cú Chulainn also tell us that not only was Vishnu a fully formed Proto-Indo-European god, but the details of his specific avatars are also archaic and were originally part of one deity, the Vishnu type. The concept that he was Krishna, dark, Vamana, dwarfish, Narasimha, a man-beast, Varaha, a boar, Vrika, connected to a bound wolf form, etc., etc., was all in place in the Proto-Indo-European form of this god. Otherwise, we could not have ended up with all of these aspects preserved together so precisely in both Cú Chulainn and Vishnu, across the world from one another. Make no mistake. So we know now that Krishna, for example, was not a native Indian or Dravidian god, but Vishnu always was Krishna from his Proto-Indo-European original conception, even if his exact depiction changed and softened over time. The extensive completeness of this parallel can also conclusively tell us that Vidar is not Vishnu after all, as Georges Dumézil thought. One message that I try to get across with my work is that we should not cling to partial parallels, loose theories, when they are swamped out by much more complete parallels. Dumézil thought Vidar was Vishnu, based on only about 3 or 4 similarities. The fact that the vi root vi is connected to Vishnu, so therefore name similarity, which is always questionable on its own. And the fact that Vishnu is connected to the power of the foot, like when he steps on Bali, and Vidar uses his foot to step on the lower jaw of Fenrir. And the fact that Vidar, at one point, tells someone to make space in the Lokasena. And the fact that Vishnu is a god of making space. And also the fact that by stretching the mouth of Fenrir open, he is also symbolically making space with Fenrir's mouth. Each of these is reasonable and even compelling without any alternate hypothesis. But it is my hope that with the greater context of these myths, including the Gaelic version involving Oscar and the boar, we can see what is really going on here, and that the similarities Dumézil points to amount only to vague similarities and coincidences when compared to the larger pattern I have laid out. Sometimes similarities can indeed just be coincidences. In this larger pattern, Vidar and Oscar are instead playing the role directly equal to Sharabha instead, the killer of both Narasimha and Varaha, within a pattern just like the killing of Fenrir and the boar of 4 Mile. Oscar uses the knee instead of the foot to stretch the mouth of the beast, and therefore the foot in this mytheme was not necessarily seen as the important detail that remained consistent, and Vidar and Oscar are clearly continuing the deific force of their father and grandfather, Odin and Finn respectively. Thus they are far more clearly and not speculatively extensions of the Rudra Shiva deity, and not the Vishnu one. Ironically, the Vishnu type is now much more clearly their chief opponent, and so we must let go of the loose connections offered by Dumasil here, since they fall apart in comparison and will only lead astray. The equation of Fenrir to the avatars of Vishnu and Vidar to Sharabha simply swamps out the similarities of Vidar to Vishnu. Good comparative mythology must know how to cut away the dead wood, the coincidences, not always try to hold on to every superficial similarity even when the fuller context doesn't support it, which is something I see people do sometimes. I challenge you to clean house when a better explanation becomes apparent, and to strive for clear sight of the core of the myth, because it was not haphazardly assembled, but has an intentional meaning imbued in it by its composers, and a larger meaningful structure that it is within. This is a point I also insist upon regarding the issue of Ymir, not equaling the Purusha, and the principle is the same and I think a vital lesson to convey. Vishnu, ultimately, is noble, even in his haughtiness and hunger for glory. He is shiningly magnificent and venerable. His spirit, or that of his avatars, is undaunted, until they are completely throttled or made to see truth by Shiva. He embodies aristocratic pride in its positive and in its destructive character, and in that way is paradoxical. His inflexible and repeated refusals to submit in the face of the army of the gods, or the transcendent god Shiva, is the perfected form of courageous pride, standing unbowed in the face of annihilation. Along with the virtue of bravery, he is also an important model of atonement and self-sacrifice in the end, and is similar to Bhairava and Indra in this, who also undergo periods of atonement for sins committed. In conclusion, we have a uniquely detailed and well-preserved version of the European Vishnu-type mythos in the figure of Cú Chulainn, and he reincarnates into a sort of doomsday form as the boar of 4 Mile, and is finally killed, much like Fenrir, or a combination of Narasimha and Virkha and Varaha. We then have a god in the mythic texts called Nate, or Noithon, in Welsh, who fits the description and the mythic role of a Vishnu type. And so we can say with relative confidence that Cú Chulainn is likely to be a highly detailed, legendary form of the god Nate, the Celtic Vishnu. This parallel opens up a vista in which we can begin to see a Vishnu-type mythos that stretches across Europe and beyond, and which has never yet been put together in full. We will explore these further parallels in a future video, and they will reinforce the Cú Chulainn parallel we have laid out here.
Hail to Cú Chulainn,
Incarnation of Nate, the Krishna, Govinda, Vamana, Narasimha, Varaha, Evaya Marut, Makha, Mahavira, Vishnu of the Celts. The scholar Ronald Hutton has said, quote, "All of this is the sort of half-serious exaggeration which audiences have enjoyed in heroic tales at all times and places. To regard characters such as Cú Chulainn, Fergus mac Roic, or Conall Cernach as former gods turned into humans by a later storyteller is to misunderstand their literary and religious function. Cú Chulainn is no more a former god than Superman is." Unquote. We can now see how shallow-minded this sort of arrogant speaking beyond one's available evidence is. This sort of blundering overreach in Celtic studies must end. I'm not counseling less caution on this matter, but on the contrary, pointing out that not nearly enough caution has been taken by those who want to prematurely declare Divine heroes like Cú Chulainn are not based directly on gods. As we can now see, Cú Chulainn clearly is. He is the most fully preserved Vishnu type anywhere outside of India. If this doesn't qualify as mythological, then nothing does. Indeed, the whole of the Ulster cycle has complex theology encoded carefully and intentionally throughout it, if we just would learn how to read it. We just need to understand that the category of euhemerized God is exactly the correct one to apply in cases such as these. Please check out my Patreon if you would like to support the channel and see all of the important topics I have in mind get made into videos, as well as supporting the completion of my second book, Briochan's Tower, in which many mysteries will be solved. My book, Taliesin's Map, is available from Amazon. Link in the description.